So welcome, friends, to the 2021 George Gorman Memorial Lecture. My name is Mark Russ, and I'm one of the trustees of the George Gorman Memorial Fund. George Gorman was born in 1916 and served the Society of Friends in many ways. He was clerk of what was then Young Friends Central Committee, which is now Young Friends General Meeting, in the 1940s. George moved on to work for Friends Home Service Committee based at Friends House in London and became its General Secretary in 1952. He stayed working in that role until his retirement in 1981. By then, the department had become known as Quaker Home Service, and it has since been known as Quaker Life. George delivered this 1973 Swarthmore Lecture, The Amazing Fact of Quaker Worship, and extracts from his writings can be found in the current Quaker Faith and Practice of Britain Yearly Meeting. He had a particular ministry to inquirers, people discovering Quakers for the first time, and to young friends. In 1982, George Gorman died suddenly of a brain hemorrhage very shortly after his retirement at the age of 66. The Memorial Fund was set up later that year in recognition of George's contribution to the Society of Friends. The fund exists to financially support the ministry of friends aged 18 to 35 years in Europe and the Middle East. The George Gorman Memorial Lecture aims to amplify the ministry of friends aged 18 to 35 at our yearly meeting gatherings. It is my pleasure to introduce this year's lecturer, Sam Donaldson, and his lecture, Old Roots, New Roots. Sam is a coach, mindfulness mentor, and poet. His journey has taken him through academia with an MA in post-war recovery studies, living and working in a large community for adults with and without learning difficulties, and experience of having bipolar. He is a passionate believer in the transformative power of a meditative practice and is a member of Quaker Roots, a community of friends building a creative, vibrant, and radical Quaker response to the Defence and Security Equipment International (DESI) Arms Fair. The lecture will formally finish at 8 p.m. British Summer Time, but for those who wish, Sam has offered to stay for an extra 30 minutes for an informal Q&A, finishing around 8:30 p.m. I invite us to take a worshipful pause, and Sam will begin speaking when he's ready.
We, the Quaker community, stand amidst a perplexing scene. Our numbers continue to dwindle, like most other religious groups in this country. Statistically, we may not be here in 100 years' time. A decline that is happening at a time when our world desperately needs more truth, more equality, more peace, more simplicity, and more sustainability. At a time when the human hunger for depth, meaning, and connection remains as strong as ever. We find ourselves living through a time of a global pandemic, which has sent out a tremor, shaking the very foundations of our Western way of life that had once felt so stable. And furthermore, more and more of us are waking up to the reality that we live within and co-create together this white supremacist, imperialist, heteropatriarchal capitalist system that dominates the globe, that kills this sacred earth, that causes so much suffering, death, and destruction. It can be tempting, at least for me it has been, when faced with such a perplexing scene, to lose all calm and to descend either into apathetic despair or to rise up uncontrollably into a flame of frustrated fury. At times, I've found myself slipping into thinking that this present moment is a curse and have become lost in negativity, with life losing its joy, its creative potential, its adventure. As J.R.R. Tolkien writes in The Lord of the Rings, "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." In this lecture, I will explore how we as a community might do the best we can with this time that has been given to us. The lecture will have two halves. In the first half, I will start by sharing some reflections about my sense of self and inner story, and then move on to applying some of those ideas to our communal Quaker identity and inner story. In the second half, I will then lead us through a 4-stage guided meditation together, inspired by Joanna Macy in Chris Johnston's book, Active Hope. But before I start with my own reflections, I just want to play This Present Time by Paulette Meyer as a way of centering ourselves. And in the song, she sings, "Ye have no time but this present time, so use your time for your soul's sake." So, if the stats are right, and we do only have 100 years left as a community, I'm interested to see how will we approach this time that we have been given? What's our attitude and our mindset going to be? Will we bury our heads in the sand, ignoring what we don't want to have to face? Will we choose to see this decline as a problem that needs to be solved, a burden that needs to be carried, and become heavy, serious, solemn, filled only with frustration, doom, and despair? Or will we instead find a way to see it as an important crisis opportunity, a bittersweet gift, a unique chance for us to learn, to change, to transform, a unique chance for us to co-create new things together? I'm hoping that we will find the ways to adopt the attitude and energy so beautifully expressed by Mary Oliver in her poem, When Death Comes, which I will read for you now. When death comes, like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And I look upon time as no more than an idea. And I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy and as singular. And each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending, as all music does, towards silence. And each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. But how can we come to adopt this attitude and energy of boundless wonder and amazement? I will now share some reflections on an unfolding personal experience, a gradual transformative shift in my perspective around my own sense of self and identity that I'm finding is helping me to do just this, to embrace this present moment with all its challenges as a gift and opportunity rather than a curse, and to be more open, curious, and joyful rather than being trapped in frustration, fear, and anger. This unfolding experience began for me in a significant way in my early 20s, with some intense experiences linked with the onset of the highs and lows of mood, often labeled bipolar. Around the age of 24, I experienced my first ecstatic high or hypermanic experience. This mountaintop experience crept up on me very organically. I began to feel like I had unearthed a deep well of unlimited energy within myself. Everything felt so connected, so synchronous, and everything that was holding me back from living and loving wholeheartedly seemed to fall away. I was meditating a lot at the time, and silence began to feel immensely rich and nourishing. In this state, I had an experience of reality becoming translucent, as if love was pouring through everything I could see. For the first time in my life, it made sense to talk of God. During this experience, I wrote the following poem. The longer I wait, the quicker you come. The less I speak, the more I say. Doing nothing, all things happen. Thinking no thoughts, I understand all things. Your depths are unimaginable. I will travel into you forever, never even reaching the start of you. The years following this initial experience or opening have been a time of gradual but intense processing and integration, working out its implications on my way of being in the world. One of the biggest shifts that has occurred during this process of integration has been a waking up to a sense of self that is deeper than my separate ego identity, and a corresponding waking up to the interrelated nature and ultimate oneness of all reality. This shift is well known to all the great mystical traditions and is understood as a waking up to one's true, uncontrived, essential nature, a coming home to know oneself as that spacious, open, accepting awareness that always remains steady and unchanging, like an ocean able to welcome all the waves of life, like a vast sky able to welcome all the clouds of existence. I have found that this discovery of a deeper sense of self, deeper than my ego, has been truly liberating for me, helping me to know a deeper peace and satisfaction, steadier than anything I knew before. In my meditation practice, the more that I sit and rest in this state of open, effortless awareness, the more I find that I'm able to remain joyful, open, and adventurous in the face of the vast challenges of our present time. This discovery of a deeper sense of self has also liberated me to be more open and flexible with my own sense of identity or inner story. Recently, I found it particularly helpful working with Dr. Tim O'Brien's book, Inner Story, Understand Your Mind, Change Your Mind, in which he writes the following, which is an extended quote, which I'll read for you now. There are two stories inside your head. One is about your life. The other is controlling your life. The story about your life contains the experiences and events that have happened to you over time. This story is your life story, and you are aware of your life story. But there is another story inside your head, and it is determining what you think, what you feel, and what you do. It is the story that convinces you what sort of a person you are and tells you what you can and cannot achieve in life. You are living it when you are awake and living it when you are asleep. You are living it every moment of every day. And that story is your inner story. And I call it your inner story because it begins and exists inside your head. Your mind is busy writing it for you right now. but how aware are you of your inner story? Now, working with Dr. Tim O'Brien's threefold insight that I have a life story made up of all the things that have happened to me, and an inner story, an often unconscious script that I incessantly tell myself about myself, but that the deepest truth about myself is that I am neither of these two stories. This threefold insight has enabled me to face the hard fact that I have often constructed an inner story based around my telling myself that I am special, unique, better than others, all as an unconscious way of protecting myself from my own vulnerability. The more that I ground myself in my essential, uncontrived, true nature through my meditation practice, and the more that I hold my inner story in my awareness, recognizing it to be not some fixed final truth, but rather a fluid, flexible, flowing fabrication, constantly changing, constantly transforming, constantly evolving. The more I find I can take my small ego sense of self and its accompanying story a little less seriously, and the less I allow it to entangle, cloud, and distort my everyday experiences and interactions. The more I do this spiritual and psychological work, the more I find I can take life a little less personally, be a little less self-obsessed, laugh at myself more readily, accept my failures, fragilities, and flaws with more self-compassion, embrace the critical feedback I receive as a gift, work with my mistakes, which of course are many, with more honesty, and play with my inner story with far less defensiveness and far more creativity than I did before, knowing that while I may have an inner story, I am not it. I'm finding this gradually deepening and unfolding transformation in my sense of self to be something truly precious to me, something which is helping me to live in these times we have been given with an open, curious, adventurous, and joyful heart, helping me to know that wholeness and worth run deeper than any internal consistency of one's personal or communal identity, liberating me from the torturous obsession with self or communal perfection. Now, I just want to invite another pause now before continuing to reflect on what some of these thoughts about selfhood, identity, and inner stories might mean for us as a Quaker community. And so in a minute, I'll just read a poem of mine called Live Outrageously. And in the background, I'll be playing a video of the poem, which has been illustrated beautifully by Michel Dumont. Stop. Be still. And breathe deeply. Breathe deeply into the mystery of being anything at all. Stop. Be still. And step out. Out of comfortable cages, opening wide your eyes to receive wider horizons and the great unknowns as you would a long-lost friend. The road less traveled calls for you, so throw wide your doors and embrace adventure. Life waits for you, so take the risk to let go of all you know and live outrageously. Hold out your hands, break bread, give generously, embrace solitude, pour yourself a cup of tea, and set aside time to nurture seeds, to write, to paint, to sing, to dance, and to listen to a silent hour underneath a star-filled sky. Stop. Be still. Breathe deeply. And see. There was never any need for sacrifices, for the real exhibition was always free. You were surrounded by presence the whole time. So what I now want to ask us as a community is whether we need a collective liberation from our shared Quaker inner story, a collective Damascus Road experience, so to speak. Are we too attached to our collective Quaker story, clinging too tightly to our old roots? And is this holding us back from fully embracing the challenges and opportunities of this present moment, preventing us from stepping out and forging new routes? As a Quaker community with 400 years of history behind us, we now have a pretty solid identity, a pretty solid inner story. While there is constant contestation over bits of this shared story, we do have our testimonies, we have our silent rituals and liturgies, our tried and tested ways of how we do and don't gather, of how we do and don't make decisions. We have our implicit theologies and philosophies that underpin our community's current form. We have our buildings and books and more. Now, lots of this 400-year history is wonderful and truly deserves to be celebrated. But there is also much that we can look back on with sadness and work to make amends for. But regardless of whether our communal identity and inner story is a good one or a bad one, or some inevitable mix of the two, what I want to ask is whether it's time for us to let go of our shared story, to create a detached distance from it, to become once again an empty space in which the new can be conceived and gestated and birthed. Is it time for us to rewild our Quakerism? Is it time for us to rewild our Quakerism? Is it time for us to open ourselves up again to the wild goose, to that spirit of life, of truth, of peace, of love that blows wherever she wills? Is it time for us to stop trying to keep our meetings and structures and processes so neat and tidy, so nice and polite, so safe and comfortable, and instead loosen up and let go, taking the risk to invite in more discomfort, more fire, more guts, more heart, more passion, more rage, more tears, more laughter, more dreams? As the World Cup winning rugby player Johnny Wilkinson puts it, is it time we adopted an explore mindset rather than a control mindset? Now, the theologian Walter Brueggemann expresses the challenging call to be constantly open to change, to evolution, to the new, in his book on the spirituality of the Psalms, where he writes, "The life of faith expressed in the Psalms is focused on the two decisive moves of faith that are always underway, by which we are regularly surprised and which we regularly resist. One, out of a settled orientation into a season of disorientation, and two, from a context of disorientation to a new orientation, surprised by a new gift from God, a new coherence made present to us just when we thought all was lost." Now, I believe that we are being invited to enter a season of disorientation, a season of deconstruction, in order that we might become ready for a season of new orientation. And it is worth noting here that creating space for deconstruction is a necessary part of the conservation of any institution. For as the philosopher theologian John Caputo writes in his book Hermeneutics, an institution is truly conserved, not by being conservative, but by sustaining the tension between its memory of the past and an attempt to do something new. That is a risky business. A living institution attempts to devise programs that produce new objects, that propose new projects, that think concepts hitherto unthought. A living institution programs for the unprogrammable. It crosses borders and examines things that have no legitimacy in terms of the received standards of the day. But for this to happen, for us Quakers to conserve ourselves as a living institution open to the new, I believe we are going to have to do three things. One, we're going to need to learn how to let go of old ways that no longer serve their original purpose. Two, we are going to need to prepare ourselves for taking on new, surprising, unexpected ways, finding the courage and centeredness to step out of the known into the unknown. And three, we are going to need to develop the wisdom of discernment so that we may know what we need to conserve, what we need to deconstruct, and what we need to create afresh. Now, what does all this mean for me personally as a Quaker? For me, I've come to a sense of what is essential to my own Quaker way, which enables me to let go and to be more exploratory, playful, and free with everything else, with everything that I consider to be non-essential. I believe the essential purpose of the Religious Society of Friends is to be a listening community open to the spirit of truth, peace, and love, to be a community that allows itself to be led by the light into new ways of being. And if this is our function or purpose as a community, I see Quakerism as needing to involve three core commitments. One, a commitment to practices that nurture a deep interior stillness, silence, and spaciousness, so that we may know and be a deep peace and be open and attuned to spiritual leadings. Two, a commitment to engaging in real, open, courageous, vulnerable, generative conversations grounded on deep listening and truthful speaking, so that we can build a loving, just, authentic community. And three, a commitment to taking courageous, peaceful, creative action so that we can help to bring about a more beautiful world. For me, as long as these three commitments are present, serving the ultimate goal of nurturing a listening community open to the spirit of truth, peace, and love, I'm happy with whatever outer forms, structures, or processes we may adopt. As I have mentioned, I believe we are entering into a period of profound change and transition, where we are being asked to let go of lots of old forms and ways of being, and to courageously co-create new things together. I am intrigued to see how we as a Quaker community will respond and unfold in these years ahead. Will we stick to the known, the tried and tested, the safe? Will we repeat old patterns and walk old paths? Or will we risk everything, opening ourselves up with courage, with curiosity, with creativity, to the wild adventure of faith? Will we become channels and vessels for new visions and energies that are coming into being even as we speak? I hope, adapting the words of John O'Donoghue's beautiful poem Fluent, that we can learn how to live like a river flows, growing into a community carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. I know that if we can, the years ahead will be far more interesting for us all, whatever our future may hold. And so that's the first half of the lecture. And in a moment, I'm going to lead us through a 4-stage guided meditation inspired by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnston's book, Active Hope. But before I do, I'd like to invite us into another pause where I'll play the song Your Next Bold Move by Ani DeFranco, which I discovered this lockdown. The song spoke to me, both because it brilliantly captures the deep pain involved in living in this age of capitalism, but also because despite the pain, the song still leaves open the hopeful call of the next bold move. And I wonder, what are our next bold moves going to be as a community? And so we're now going to move into a 4-stage sort of guided reflection. And the first stage is called Coming from Gratitude. So in their book, Active Hope, Joanna Macy and Chris Johnston highlight the importance of cultivating gratitude, stressing how gratitude breeds a deep connection with life, with others, and with Mother Earth, a connection that nurtures the kind of resilience we need if we are going to be a source of life in a dying world. And as the poet Jack Gilbert writes in his poem, A Brief for the Defence, we must risk delight. We can do without pleasure, but not delight, not enjoyment. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. And so now I'm just going to invite you to spend 5 minutes in silence, bringing to mind all the things that you are grateful for about our Quaker community. Just allow yourself to savor these things as they come into your mind before giving thanks and then moving on to the next thing and to the next thing and to the next thing. So we'll just move into 5 minutes of silence now. And so we're now going to move into the second stage of the reflection, which is called honoring our pain. So the second stage of the active hope process is honoring our pain for the world, which is all about listening deeply to the wisdom held within the difficult and challenging aspects of our reality, all the aspects that we would rather avoid facing, but which hold within them the motivation and drive for us to change the world. For this stage, I'm going to read a letter written by a young Dutch Jew, Etty Hillesum, who in the midst of the darkest of the dark of human history, penned the following from Westerbork concentration camp. I've been pondering this letter a lot over the period of the pandemic and feel it speaks powerfully to us all in this present moment. And so I'll read this letter now, and after which I'll invite us into a few more minutes of stillness, where we can ponder what are the things about our Quaker community in particular that we find hard and painful to bear. So this is the letter written by Etty. If we save only our bodies and nothing more from the camps all over the world, that would not be enough. What matters is not whether we preserve our lives at any cost, but how we preserve them. I sometimes think that every new situation, good or bad, can enrich us with new insights. But if we abandon the hard facts that we are forced to face, if we give them no shelter in our heads and hearts, do not allow them to settle and change into impulses through which we can grow and from which we can draw meaning, then we are not a viable generation. It is not easy, and no doubt less easy for us Jews than for anyone else. Yet if we have nothing to offer a desolate post-war world, but our bodies saved at any cost, if we fail to draw new meaning from the deep wells of our distress and despair, then it will not be enough. New thoughts will have to radiate outward from the camps themselves. New insights spreading lucidity will have to cross the barbed wire enclosing us and join with the insights that people outside will have to earn just as bloodily in circumstances that are slowly becoming almost as difficult. And perhaps, on the common basis of an honest search for some way to understand these dark events, wrecked lives may yet take a tentative step forward. And so we'll just enter into a few minutes of stillness now, and just as an opportunity for us to reflect on some of the hard facts, the hard realities about our Quaker community that we may not be wanting to have to face. And so now we'll move into the third stage of the reflection, which is called seeing with new eyes. And so in this third stage of the active hope process, it's all about inner transformation, about coming to perceive things differently so that we can then be differently, live differently, and act differently. And one traditional practice for nurturing this kind of transformation is sitting with a question like, who are you? And letting it do its work. And so I'm just going to read a passage by a writer called David Rico from a book called The Sacred Heart of Jesus. And I'll just read the passage and then we'll just sit, have another period of a few minutes of stillness, just to sit with the questions, who am I and who are we? Who am I and who are we? So this is the passage. I went on a pilgrimage to the woods of Mount Subesi near Assisi, where St. Francis had lived in contemplative retreat. I lay in the cave where the saints slept, and then I walked out into nature. As I stood transfixed by the natural beauty of the place, I suddenly heard a voice asking me, who are you? My mind was about to come up with an answer when I stopped myself. I felt drawn instead simply to wait in silence. At the same moment, the leaves of the trees surrounding me shimmered in the sunlight in willowy slow motion. The whole world seemed still and yet still moving. I realized the leaves and all the living things I was looking at so intensely were opening. That word opening suddenly repeated itself, and I knew it at once to be the answer to the question, who are you? This was a powerful religious experience for me. And when I returned to San Francisco, I shared it with my friend, a Franciscan priest. He looked at me knowingly and asked, do you happen to know the prayer St. Francis spoke when he went to that mountain? I did not know it, and he told me the prayer was, Lord, who am I? Lord, who are you? This synchronicity confirmed me in my newfound trust in continual opening as a spiritual path. And so we'll just sit for a few more minutes of stillness. Just sit with the questions, who am I? Who are we? And we'll just move now into the fourth and final stage of this reflection. I do apologize that we're coming a little close to the end, so it might run over by about 5 minutes. So if you do need to go, yeah, apologies for that. So the fourth and final stage is called going forth. And about this stage, Joanna Macy and Chris Johnston write, "We live at a time when the living body of our earth is under attack, and when the attacker is not an alien force, but our own industrial growth society. At the same time, an extraordinary recovery process is underway, a vital creative response that we call the Great Turning. What helps us face the mess we're in is the knowledge that each of us has something significant to offer, a contribution to make. In rising to the challenge of playing our best role, we discover something precious that both enriches our lives and adds to the healing of our world. An oyster, in response to trauma, grows a pearl. We grow and offer our gift of active hope." And if we can learn anything from the early Quakers, it is that when people make themselves truly open to listen deeply, the spirit moves. And when she moves, she shakes things up. So for this stage, I'm going to invite us to listen deeply for the sound of things approaching, for the sound of things about to happen. And to help with this, I'm just going to read out a passage from Isaiah 3 times. I'll read it a couple of times in the old monastic sacred reading style. And then we'll have a few more minutes of stillness to ponder and reflect. And as I read the passage through twice, just listen for a particular word or phrase that resonates with you. And then reflect on what it might be wanting to say to you today. So I'll just read through this passage twice. "This is what God says, the God who builds a road right through the ocean, who carves a path through pounding waves, the God who summons horses and chariots and armies. They lie down and then can't get up. They're snuffed out like so many candles. Forget about what's happened. Don't keep going over old history. Be alert, be present. I'm about to do something brand new. It's bursting out. Don't you see it? There it is. I'm making a road through the desert, river in the Badlands. Wild animals will say thank you, the coyotes and the buzzards, because I provided water in the desert, rivers through the sun-baked earth. This is what God says, the God who builds a road right through the ocean, who carves a path through pounding waves, the God who summons horses and chariots and armies. They lie down and then can't get up. They're snuffed out like so many candles. Forget about what's happened. Don't keep going over old history. Be alert, be present. I'm about to do something brand new. It's bursting out. Don't you see it? There it is. I'm making a road through the desert, rivers in the Badlands. Wild animals will say thank you, the coyotes and the buzzards, because I provided water in the desert, rivers through the sun-baked earth. So we'll just have a few more minutes of stillness now, just to reflect on whatever may have spoken to you from that reading. And so I'll bring it now to an end, the lecture. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much. I'd also like to say just thank you to the George Gorman trustees for inviting me to give the lecture, and also for the support, particularly Peter, Jules and Mark, for supporting me along the way, and also just some family and friends who've supported me in the process of writing and editing the lecture. So but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm sure if we were all in the same room together, you would be feeling a wash of warm appreciation from everybody. Thank you so much for the ministry you've shared with us this evening. Thank you also to Caroline, our live captioner, and thank you to the audience, to all of you, for coming to listen.